Hello, let's get into lesson 5. How much of our calories should come from carbohydrates or fats? So the last 3 lessons we've really focused on carbohydrates. We're shifting our attention to fats in this lesson. So our do now question to start this lesson is about a recent change that happened in spring 2026, where the US government flipped up the food pyramid upside down, so that we should be eating more protein, dairy, and healthy fats. Um, that's at the top of the pyramid now, the wider portion. And where previously fats and oils were used sparingly, and we had more grains, and there's a focus on eating less whole grains in this new redesigned pyramid. So we give students some time to talk about that and reflect on whether their diets are more in line with the old food pyramid or the new one. So here's a summary of those changes that are described in the video students watch. At this point of the lesson, we revisited an earlier activity where we burnt a Cheeto to demonstrate that the food has energy. But now that we're comparing fats and carbohydrates, we want to know, is 10 grams of fat, how much energy does that have compared to 15 grams of carbohydrates? Since Cheetos have both fats and carbohydrates, it's hard to tell where the energy is coming from. In this slide, you're going to introduce students to the concept of what a calorie is and how we could measure it. So to represent carbohydrates, you're going to demonstrate how much energy they have by burning some circus peanuts, which are basically pure carbohydrates. To represent fat, you'll need to secure some beef tallow and make candles out of them. So here's kind of the lab setup. You're going to take a soda can and put it on a ring stand and measure the temperature of 100 milliliters of water. And then on the below the can, there's your circus peanut, which has been sort of skewered with a large paper clip. I recommend that you do this under a fume hood or outside, and that you burn them, not your students, because the circus peanut can, if you don't burn it correctly, kind of fall down and can make kind of a gooey mess. It's not something you want at each of your lab stations. So I recommend running this lab as this first part as a demo to collect your data. So here's the data table template. So you'll time how long it takes for the circus peanut to burn, and then measure how much the temperature goes up in the water, and what's the mass of the circus peanut before and after burning. And then you can use this information to calculate how many calories per gram were we able to measure, and then also how many calories were burned per second. So this is a prediction slide. Now that we're going to transition to burning fat and take those same measurements and see how long is it going to take for burning the fat to reach the same temperature as the circuit peanut, basically producing the same amount of calories. Is it going to take longer? Is it going to burn more or less of the beef tallow compared to the circus peanut? And so here's the sample data table. In the slides, I also have sample data that I collected, so you can kind of see uh, uh, what to expect for timing, but it takes about 5 to 6 minutes for the beef tallow candle to burn, to raise the temperature high enough so that it matches the temperature difference from burning the circus peanut in your demo. And here are a couple sentence starters for students to summarize the investigation. At this point, you're going to tell students that, in the nutrition facts label, which they've experienced already, that, remind them that it's 4 calories per gram for carbohydrates and 9 for fat. Um, and your results might not exactly match that. The ratio should be about the same of carbs to um, uh, the amount of calories in carbs versus fats, like about 2 to 1. But the numbers will be lower because you're losing a lot of heat with your not so fancy calorimeter. Um, so so those are things to discuss with students to see, what are the limitations of our experiment and what does it show. And so then to wrap up this lesson, uh, you play this video of how a scientist would uh, actually measure calories in food and kind of give students a little bit of background information on how those calorie numbers on their nutrition facts, where they come from.
Here.
So now we're into day 2 of lesson 5. Um, the do now has us um, think about uh, what we've learned in the previous lesson, some of the results of our experiment, and to think about how do we burn fat in our bodies. So we're going to focus really on the metabolism of fat. You could go much deeper into this process if you wanted to, but I just tried to write this lesson to give a brief overview um, of how fats are broken down in our body. So to do that, we're going to revisit a data set the students are already familiar with, the graham cracker data, but we're going to focus on just the highlighted section here of fats and fatty acids and use this data set to compare with the process of digesting carbohydrates. So there's the same sort of data table. We'll follow what happens to fat and fatty acids throughout the digestive system. Now students are going to make an initial model of fat digestion to kind of see where it's entering the bloodstream and what's happening when fat gets broken down to fatty acids. And so you have an opportunity to use this model to compare amongst the class and generate some questions that you might have about fats. And so this next portion of the lesson, we're going to kind of compare carbohydrate structure versus fats and do a similarities of difference chart and start to explore the different types of fatty acids. So here's like a summary comparison chart of carbohydrates and fats. Now we get into the structure of saturated fats versus saturated fats. So that these unsaturated fats have these double bonds, which make it so that unsaturated fatty acids are kind of more spread out and more likely to be a liquid at room temperature. Then students do a reading to learn more about these different types of fat that they might find in their diet, what they do in their body, and what are healthier fats and less healthy fats. Here's a summary table of kind of where these fats are found in our diet and what their health effects are. So now we're ready to move on to the third day of lesson 5. And we start to, now that we know a little bit more about fats in our diet and the health benefits and risks associated with them, we're going to kind of dive into a historical debate about where we should be getting our calories from, fats or carbohydrates. And so to understand this a little bit better, we're going to need a little bit of historical context. So there was a kind of rising trend of heart attacks. And then in 1955, President Eisenhower had a heart attack while he was in office, and that really led to a cultural shift as they blamed his high-fat diet, high cholesterol diet on his heart attack. And so during this time, there were 3 very influential scientists in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s who conducted research that was really informative and shaped American diet trends. So these are the three scientists. So Ansel Keys promoted the kind of Mediterranean diet, and John Yudkin really focused on the dangers of added sugar and its contribution to diabetes and uh, obesity. And then Robert Atkins, really focused on uh, trying to get your restricting carbohydrates so that your body would go through ketosis as a weight loss strategy. So you might have heard of the Atkins diet. He's the one behind that. So students kind of get into a jigsaw formation, and each one is assigned one scientist to kind of learn about and uh, understand the evidence behind their claims. And then we have kind of a class-wide discussion about who we think has the strongest evidence and how would these three different opinions and their evidence uh, so, influence our design of our school breakfasts and lunches. And this is a great video that kind of in a humorous way uh, gives an overview of the debate between fat and carbohydrates and what is to blame for the current obesity epidemic. In this slide, we're going to do kind of a callback and revisit the blood sugar balance game, and remember that the fat tissues they increased when we had really high blood sugar levels, and that we had some stored energy in the form of glycogen, and when we release the hormone glucagon, then our blood sugar could go up from that stored energy. To wrap up lesson 5, students take an individual assessment that looks like this, where they take one of the breakfasts or lunches um, uh, that they chose at the start of the unit in their initial model, and do kind of a calorie inventory to see if most of the calories are coming from fats or carbs. And after they look at that analysis of the fats versus carbs, they see if their diet, their menu has is high in saturated fat or unsaturated fat, and then they make a substitution to change that balance. And then they try to align their menu with the views of Keyes, Judkins, or Atkins, who would be most in agreement of their meal, or who would disagree, and why, what aspect of their menu is what would be kind of aligns with their research or is refuted by their research. So that's it for lesson 5. In lesson 6, we're going to start to explore proteins.